Okay, thank you very much. It's a wonderful pleasure to be together on this important topic, and apologies for not being here yesterday. But we had also the community San Egidio yesterday, which was a wonderful gathering on related topics. I think the three key words of this morning's session, as Stefano has just indicated, are work, participation, and creation. And I want to say some words about the three and how they relate. Let me start by saying that I believe that there are two overall orientations that every part of the world needs in the 21st century. The first is sustainable development, and the second is social democracy. It's easy. They both have SD in the initials. So I believe in the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, and the Social Democratic Goals. When I say social democracy, I mean small s, small d. I mean an ethos, not a political party. And the ethos of social democracy has been for more than 100 years the middle path between the libertarianism of US ideology and the fully planned state economy, as our friends in Poland lived under up until 1989. Social democracy aims for a middle path. Being an Aristotelian at heart, I believe the middle path is almost always the right answer to two extremes, one of deficiency and one of excess. And in this case, I think that this is correct. The idea of sustainable development is the globally agreed idea that we should combine economic prosperity, social justice, and environmental sustainability. So it's a closely related concept. When we study each year in the Sustainable Development Report, the rankings of countries by SDG achievement, Sustainable Development Goal achievement, the social democracies of Northern Europe rank the highest in the world. So Finland, Norway, Sweden, Denmark are the countries that have the longest standing political tradition of social democracy, and they are at the top of the list in achieving sustainable development. The two go together. Social democracy, when it was conceived in the late 19th century, did not have an environmental component in it, especially. It was really about a middle path between a Marxist vision and a laissez-faire British liberal vision, and environment was not part of that insight. Sustainable development enriches that idea. The title of this session is a Real European Green Deal. Let me start by saying that I think the European Green Deal is a real Green Deal. It's extremely important in my view. It is a highly bureaucratic approach to sustainable development in the best Weberian sense. It is rational, bureaucratic to the hilt. So there are processes, systems, laws, procedures, extremely Weberian. But this is what is needed in a complex society. Is rules, laws, orientation. Of course, it's not sufficient. Without the spirit, there will not be the result. But the European Green Deal is a coherent, consistent, holistic approach to much of the challenge, not all of it, but much of it. It calls for the decarbonization of the energy system, for reaching net zero emissions, for sustainable land use in the farm to fork program, in the digitalization of Europe, in a new, albeit still limited, fiscal union that is a big breakthrough in this commission with the European Fund for Recovery and Resilience. This is a big advance in my view, though quantitatively small, still conceptually a large advance. I believe not only do we need all of these components, but we need more Europe in the process, because the logic of sustainable development and the logic of social democracy is shared goals among neighbors. This is not only, Europe is by far the farthest along in this, but it's needed in all parts of the world. Any place where you see neighbors that are on opposite sides, in Asia, the US attempt to divide Japan and Korea from China, or the division between India and Pakistan, or the division between Saudi Arabia and Iran, you see disaster, because tremendous danger and unmet opportunities for cooperation. So a strong regional commitment with the underpinnings of finance to go along with it is part of the European Green Deal, or at least part of the breakthrough of the European Green Deal, and it is extremely important. The European Green Deal is having a major global diplomatic effect. This is also important to understand. President Xi announced a year ago that China would reach net zero emissions by 2060. There is no doubt that this was spurred by Europe. This was not an internally determined outcome. This was a reaction to the European Green Deal. It was a bid by China for global diplomacy as well as China's responsibility, but it was spurred by the European Green Deal. Of course, it should be by 2050 rather than 2060, and we'll get there, actually. So we should encourage China to accelerate, but this is a European breakthrough. Japan and Korea similarly followed the European lead. The US program under Biden, which is very fragile in the US political context, is definitely motivated and inspired by the European example. In ASEAN, where Europe will meet with the ASEAN countries, ASEAN is now working on an ASEAN Green Deal, because this is important. Also, Europe's, I wouldn't call it a threat, but Europe's statement that's going to have carbon border adjustment mechanisms, or a carbon tax for imported CO2, is very good, very important, politically correct, and also substantively correct. And it is opening the eyes of all the rest of the world. Are we going to be able to export to Europe if we continue the way we're going? So Europe's playing an extremely important, positive role in this transformation. But it's not enough. The three words of the session that are highlighted, work, participation, and creation, really call on us to look more deeply. And I want to say a few words about these. Green, I think, is most clear. Europe's farthest along on the concept of green. Laurence Dubiana, more than almost anyone in the world, helped to make that a reality in the Paris Agreement. And one of the things that she worked on and that we worked on together, which I think is coming to some fruition, is Article 4.19, which says present a long-term framework. Even in 2015, we thought of 2050 as long-term. Now we think of it as tomorrow. But the idea of looking beyond 5 or 10 years, at least to mid-century, is something new for politics. And this is something extremely important that I want to highlight. We cannot do politics on a political cycle time horizon anymore. The challenges are too complex, to solve within a business cycle or within a political cycle. They require 20, 30, or 40 years of investment on a consistent way. This is very tough for politics, but it's necessary, this longer term. And the biggest move, in my view, for COP26 next month is not the nationally determined contributions, but the commitment to net zero by 2050, because this changes the fundamental orientation of national politics. So on green, I want to emphasize the longer horizon that's needed for planning, for public investment, for the business environment. On digital and dignity of work, I would underscore how technology will fundamentally transform the nature and meaning of work and the compensation of work in the future. And if it wasn't clear before COVID, I think it became very clear during this pandemic. What we do at work, what we mean by work, how we work, where we work, will change tremendously because of the digital era. In my view, with a possibility of huge benefits. I gave multiple lectures yesterday around the world on my phone. I had a nice coffee at the Coliseum lecturing in Finland. I like that, by the way. A coffee at the Coliseum is always wonderful. Being able to give a lecture in Helsinki at the same time, not bad. This is what the digital world offers us: much more flexibility. We have to think it through. It wasn't easy suddenly for everybody to stay at home and go online. By any means, we weren't organized for it, but we see that it's possible. Companies are saying, maybe a day a week, maybe 2 days a week, maybe online, maybe a global network of workers. But I think this change is very deep. I also believe that the digital revolution will mean not just different kinds of work, but more non-remunerated time in our lives, including real leisure, including more time for learning, including more time for culture, including more time for voluntary work and care economy. It's sometimes said that technology reshuffles the labor market, creates new inequalities, but new forms of work have always replaced old forms of work. I think it's a little bit better and more complicated than that, which is that technology has reduced the amount of backbreaking work of humanity systematically over time. 100 years ago, even, certainly 150 years ago, virtually everybody did physical labor of one kind or another. Most people were on farms. Work was hard. It was 10 hours a day, 6.5 days a week, maybe a Sunday off or Sunday morning off. But the rest of the week was work. It was chores. It was backbreaking labor. This is how it still is in many poor countries. And I spent a few hours once weeding in a small farm with a 70-year-old woman in Kenya. And after half a day, I could barely stand up. She does that every day, day in, day out. And I believe that mechanization and robotics and AI can break us from this kind of drudgery and this kind of backbreaking, life-taking work. Right now in the United States, for people 16 and over, the average amount spent at work, the average amount per day spent at work is 3 hours, 10 minutes. If you're at work, maybe it's 7 hours, but people are in retirement or at school or on family leave and so on. So we have an economy that makes $65,000 per person on 3 hours, 10 minutes per person of work. It will go down. We should think about that, but it does mean we need to have different ways of remuneration. We need to socialize even more of consumption. We need to guarantee more services and more goods, not through the labor market, but through the provision by society as a whole. Okay, final point I want to make. Sorry, I know I'm late. Just want to say a word about participation in community. And I want to say it in the context of demographic change. In addition to the technology change, the Anthropocene change, the green requirement, we are aging rapidly. And society is both aging and a dramatic change of age structure. If you look at the old age dependency in Europe, right now in 2020, it was 29.5%. That is the number of people 65 plus over the number of people 15 to 65. So that's the definition of old age dependency. By 2050, it will not be 29%, but 49%. By 2100, on current trajectory by the UN Population Division calculations, it'll be 55%. We don't have a society geared towards this kind of aging right now. And the question is how to ensure, question I'm more and more interested in each year, how to ensure the active participation and engagement of an older population in society, not a world of loneliness, a world of isolation, a world of hurt. And there's a lot of evidence that there is a lot of that in the world already, even with a dependency ratio of 29%. But we're going to have a tremendous demographic change in the future. We need a care economy which cares for children and cares for older people and enables families to thrive in this changing demographic situation. And this requires different kinds of public policy. So I'll just put that on the table for now and back over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.